Good evening and welcome to the League of Women Voters of Broward County Zoom event. My name is Monica Elliott and I am the president of the Broward League. For those of you unfamiliar with the League of Women Voters, we are a nonpartisan organization, meaning that we do not support or oppose a party or a candidate in any election, and we have not done so in our entire 103-year history. Our mission is to encourage informed and active participation of citizens in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Tonight's program is Understanding School Choice and Vouchers, and it will be presented by Margie Rohrbach, who is chair of our Education Committee. We will take questions at the end of the program, so if you do have questions during the program, please place them in the chat box where I or Margie can view them. And now I will turn it over to Margie. And if everybody will be sure to mute themselves, that would be helpful. Margie, it's all yours.
Thanks, Monica. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm going to share my screen. I have a little PowerPoint. If I can figure out how to do that. Okay, are we all good? Everybody see it? Okay, so the first slide just reiterates what Monica was saying. You know that the league has a two-pronged kind of a mission, and one is to educate and the other is to advocate. And tonight we will be giving you information to educate you about the different school choices, but also we'll be advocating for legislative policies and changes that we have studied and have long been priorities for the league. Okay. Not letting me advance. Okay, why can I not advance it? Oh, there it goes. Okay. So as Monica said, our topic is understanding school choice in Florida's public education system. So what we will cover tonight, a very brief one-slide history of public education. Obviously, that's a huge topic, and we can't really go into everything about how America's public education system started and evolved. So that's for another day. We will concentrate on school choice. And of course, there are many school choices in Broward County and Florida overall. But we're just going to talk about the three main parallel systems of the brick and mortar schools. Public schools, or traditional public schools, we also call them district schools, and charter schools, which are also public schools. A lot of people don't realize that, and private schools. We're also going to talk about the growing private school voucher program, how it currently is working, and what the proposed legislation that's being debated now in the state's House and Senate may change what is happening with the voucher program. And then we're going to touch on how these new possible changes relate to our Florida and our United States Constitution in relation to education. Okay, so here's our one slide about the history of public education. All right, so in 1838, at the dawn of the industrial age, a man named Horace Mann, who is also thought of as the father of public education. He was an abolitionist, and he was also an education reformer. He was an educator. He was the president of Antioch College in Ohio, and he was a congressman, and he kind of set the philosophy for public education in the United States. And he believed it to be a covenant with taxpayers. It was to be universal for all people from a variety of backgrounds. It was supposed to be non-sectarian, with well-trained professional teachers. And the curriculum was supposed to be based on the tenets of a free society, paid for, controlled, and sustained by the public. And Horace Mann famously once said, The public school is the greatest discovery made by man. Education is best provided in schools embracing children of all religious, social, and ethnic backgrounds. A teacher who is attempting to teach without inspiring the pupil with a desire to learn is hammering on cold iron. So he set the bar very high for all of us. So the purpose of public education in the US was to prepare students for their future as productive citizens, which in some cases meant training them for future careers in technical schools and so forth. But it went beyond just training workers. It went to preparing students to be analytical thinkers, to become informed voters, because you can't really have a democracy if you don't have an educated electorate who are able to analytically think and figure out for themselves how they should vote. And it also was meant to be the foundation of our democracy and assure America's future prosperity and security. So it's, you want me to, oh, there you go. So it's like what sets America apart, a lot of people like to think, from other parts of the world. All right, so in 2001, they kind of think this is where the School Accountability Initiative started. And it all started with President George W. Bush and a bipartisan coalition. They established the No Child Left Behind Act. And some people might remember that. That was the beginning of where they decided we had to really look at our curriculum standards and make them kind of cross the country, because we have a very mobile society. So it was important to kind of have common standards so that no matter where families moved, everybody in the US was kind of learning the same history standards and language arts standards and mathematics standards and science, et cetera, et cetera. It also started the big program of high stakes testing that everybody kind of loved and hated at the same time. And the system of assigning grades to schools and to school districts. It also led to more intensive teacher evaluations. I can tell you, I was a teacher for 34 years in Broward. So I can tell you that teacher evaluations really changed a lot from when I was a beginning teacher to when I left. They became much more detailed and comprehensive. And really, I think they helped people become better teachers and stop and take a look at their practice and their professional development and so forth. It also was the beginning of the movement of parent school choice. And it also changed the Florida Constitution at this time with giving the governor a lot of power himself, because he was the one himself who now appoints the State Board of Education and the Commissioner of Education. So the governor has almost total control, in a way, of Florida's public education system. So, sorry, I need a drink. And I mean water, not wine or anything. All right, so these are the choices that parents have. Florida families can choose from 6 main types of schools. Traditional public schools, also called district schools, public charter schools, public magnet schools, private schools, online academies, in other words, virtual learning, and homeschooling. But in order to make a choice, an educated choice, an informed choice, there has to be information available to parents about what they're choosing. So they have to understand, you know, what is offered at each school and which school would be best for their child. So I just want to stop for a moment and talk about, just to tell you about Florida Virtual School, because I really didn't understand it myself, but I knew that many of my students, when they were in high school, I was at Atlantic Tech, they would be taking courses at home from Florida Virtual School, or sometimes they take courses online from Broward College or something. But Florida Virtual School is actually a public school, and it has to meet the same standards as any public school. It has to have teachers with teaching certificates, and the curriculum has to align with state standards. And they have to participate in state assessments, and they receive school grades through Florida's accountability system. And actually, the Florida Virtual School is the largest virtual school in the country. All of the school districts in Florida offer online schools, programs, and courses. So currently, across the state of Florida, there's 11,832 full-time Florida Virtual School students. And then there are many students in private schools, students in charter schools, students in regular public schools, any kind of school in Florida. They are all available to them to go to take a course part-time at a Florida Virtual School. So there's 361,362 currently part-time, also called flex students at Florida Virtual. So we're not really going to talk about that as one of the choices. Tonight, we're going to talk about the three parallel systems we have, which are unequal in many ways. The traditional district schools, which are highly regulated, the charter schools, which are public schools, but are only somewhat regulated, and the private schools, which accept vouchers, which are loosely or not regulated really at all. So here, if you look at only the students who are enrolled in either a private school, a charter school, or a district school, here is the breakdown of the enrollment. So 12.8% of those students attend private schools. 11% attend charter schools, and the rest, 76.2%, attend district schools. So the vast majority of students in the state of Florida attend public school. So recent Florida school legislation. These were the bills that were passed and signed by the governor last year. So they're Florida law now. These three bills, which are the league is opposed to all three of them, are exempt. Charter and private schools are exempt from following these laws. And the reason for that is because the way the laws are written, it applies to the Florida statutes relating to district school board powers, a section from which charter schools and obviously private schools are exempt. So these three, in my opinion, horrible laws, which are causing a lot of controversy and consternation in the public, the charter school and the private schools don't have to worry about them. So the first one is the one that we've heard about, that HB 1467, the one that relates to classroom and library materials. And this is the one which threatens librarians with a loss, school librarians, with a loss of their teaching certificates, or they actually could be brought up on criminal charges, third-degree felonies, for making a book available to students, which whatever someone has decided is harmful to them. So all of these school librarians had to attend a workshop where they learned about this law and what it meant to them, because they then were tasked with making sure that every book in their school library and every book in any teacher's classroom library met the standards for being appropriate for that grade level, et cetera, et cetera. However, they didn't really give them a hard and fast criteria to go by. They told them just to judge a book about whether it could be read aloud to any audience, which kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that is what they told them to do. So people are still kind of unsure about how to follow this law. but everybody is kind of afraid because the penalties if you don't follow it are so severe. The HB 7 individual freedom law is the one that some people refer to as anti-woke, or the one that deals with the critical race theory, and which, if you speak with the curriculum people in Broward County schools, they will tell you that no school in Broward County K through 12 teaches critical race theory. That's another bill that charter schools and private schools don't have to follow. And the last one is the Parental Rights in Education, also referred to as the Don't Say Gay bill. And that's the one that prevents them from discussing anything to do with transgender or whatever, especially in K, the elementary, K through 3. But there's a new law that they're proposing that they're going to expand that up through 8th grade. Let's go on. All right, so let's look at Broward Public Schools statistics. So remember, there are two types of public schools: the district schools, the traditional district schools, and the charter schools. So together, we are the 6th largest district in the country and the 2nd largest in Florida. And as you know, school districts, just like schools, are assigned grades based on the test scores. And for the last school year, 21-22, Broward schools earned a B, missed their A by 1 point. So they're hoping, I guess, they can make that up this year. So we have 327 schools, 90 of which are charter schools. So this is the demographics for the students in Broward Public Schools, both the charter and the district. So you can see in district schools, we have a little over 200,000 students, and charter schools have almost 50,000 students. They come from 204 countries, and they speak over 190 languages. I don't even know if I could name more than 10 languages. So it's an extremely diverse school population. You can see the ethnic diversity there. There's a number of students who need English language acquisition support. And exceptional student education would cover those students who have accommodations and services because of maybe learning disabilities, behavior, emotional, physical disabilities. Speech therapy would fall under that. Even gifted students fall in that category. And the free and reduced lunch percentage, which you can see is over half of the students in Broward Public Schools, is an indicator of the poverty rates. So you can see that our diversity in Broward schools is really kind of not only a challenge, but also it's an advantage, because everybody, meets people from all over the world. And I mean, when I was teaching, you had students in your classroom from everywhere. And it was, I think, good for them to experience what other people's cultures are like. But definitely. Okay. So let's look only at the traditional district public schools. So they are governed by an elected, nonpartisan school board that is accountable to the public. And you may know that there is a bill now being proposed that they change school board elections to partisan. The league disagrees with that. Does not support that, because they would prefer to keep politics out of it. But we'll see what happens. Traditional public schools are managed by the district superintendent, who is hired and fired, apparently, by the school board and their professional staff. Usually traditional schools, and for the most part, are in neighborhood school locations. So a neighborhood would be zoned for particular schools. Of course, parents, there are some ways that parents can apply, of course, to magnet schools, which are outside of their neighborhood. If they happen to live in a district where their neighborhood school was not succeeding and maybe had earned an F grade or a D grade, I believe they could apply to be moved to another school. I'm not really sure about the rules about that. It's funded by our local property taxes, state general revenue, and they do get some federal Title I funds to supplement in high poverty schools. Charter schools are governed by an independent, non-elected school board, usually managed by a for-profit corporate entity or a contracted staff. They are usually located in privately owned or leased locations, such as churches, shopping malls, etc. And they are funded by per pupil allocation that follows the student. And they also receive capital outlay funds, which allow them to improve buildings or construct buildings as needed. However, in Broward, out of our 90 charter schools, only 4 own their own buildings, with the rest leasing. And the district owns, the traditional school district owns nearly all of the schools it operates. And all of the district schools have to be built to higher standards because the district schools, you know, are used for hurricane shelters. So they have to meet a higher building standard than other schools. Charter advocates claim that they educate children using fewer tax dollars, but as we have seen, they do not have the same overhead costs and salary levels. For example, the teachers in charter schools, I don't believe they're in the FRS system, the Florida retirement system. They aren't paid on the same salary schedule as the traditional district schools, who have a union that negotiates with the school board for their salaries. They don't have the same benefits and so forth. All of that is independent from the district schools. Okay, private schools are governed and managed by private or religious groups. They could be located in, many of them have their own buildings, but not a lot of them. Maybe like obviously American Heritage and schools like that. But many of them are located in places like churches, etc. They're funded by tuition costs, obviously, and sometimes that comes from the corporate tax credits and the vehicle sales tax contributions, which we'll talk about later, and deductions from the district per student allocation. So we'll discuss that in more detail in a few minutes. All right, this is from the Florida DOE site. It's important for parents to know before deciding if they're going to send their child to a private school, and if so, which one, that private elementary and secondary schools are not licensed, approved, accredited, or regulated by the Department of Education. Florida's private schools issue independent school diplomas that do not require approval from the state of Florida. Florida's private schools establish their own system of school accountability, grading, reporting, and evaluating, and are not included in the state's measurement of public schools. So whereas you can look at the schools in Broward County, the public schools, and you'll know in the charter schools also which ones were A, B, and so forth, you have no way of knowing how to evaluate private schools. Private elementary and secondary schools are structured as private corporations, churches, or private businesses that only report directory information and the enrollment of compulsory attendance age students to the Department of Ed. That's all they have to report. Private schools are not subject to school definitions and requirements specified in the education statutes, and they are not under the jurisdiction of the Department of Education. And this I just copied and pasted from the Florida DOE site. Okay, so the minimum requirements for private schools in Florida So if you're going to start a charter school, a private school, sorry, you have to declare as an educational center, and you register with the state of Florida. You have to keep attendance records. You have to file fingerprints and background checks on chief administrators. But you do not have to have certified teachers. You don't even have, some schools have been found to not even have teachers who have college degrees, which I just read about in the Sun Sentinel the other day, actually. The school determines the curriculum and the assessment. So they don't follow state standards for their curriculum. They can choose whichever textbooks they want. They can present whatever principles they want. They're not regulated in any way as far as that goes. Students are not required to take state mandated tests. Some parents really like that aspect because testing can be very stressful depending on your child. It might be something that, is a trigger for them. So that might be one reason they gravitate towards a private school. They're not required to follow legislative mandates like we just talked about, CRT, book censorship, etc. They're not required to provide special education support. So they don't have to, if a child has an IEP, which is called the individual education program for a child who has a learning disability or some other special accommodation like that, they need to follow the federal IDEA Act, which stands for the Individual Disability Education Act. That's a federal act that says that a student who needs special accommodations, it must be, the schools are required to provide them if they're a public school. They're not required to follow the Title IX rules prohibiting sexual discrimination. This often relates sometimes to schools that have athletic programs, and they say, maybe they don't want transgender students to be participating in a sport unless they're following the gender that's on their birth certificate. They don't have to follow those rules. They're not required to disclose their graduation rates, and there's no oversight of their finances. Basically, they don't have to follow any of those things, which all the public schools have to follow. This little chart comes from a brochure that was created by the League of Women Voters of Florida Education Committee. And you can download the full brochure from our website. It's on the education page. And it kind of gives you a clear-cut view. Oh, my phone. What the district schools are required to do, what the charter schools are required to do, and the private schools are required to do, which basically is none of these things. Sorry. So I'll let you look at that another time. All right, so here is the numbers. There's over 3,000 private schools in the state of Florida. 74% of them are not accredited. Sorry. The 35% of them are for-profit, and 54% of them are religious schools. And 13%, remember, of Florida K-12 students attend private schools. And the average tuition can be anywhere from, like close to 10,000, 11,000, but those are just the average. So in Broward, we have 228 private schools, and there are 52, well, almost 53,000 students in them. Now, not every private school has to accept the vouchers. So there are like 2,300, so it's like 2/3 of the private schools in Florida accept vouchers. So, and of those, 69% of them are unaccredited schools. 31, a third of them are for-profit schools. And almost 60% of them are religious schools. Only 3% of the voucher schools are nonprofit, non-religious, and accredited. And 590 voucher schools are nonprofit and accredited, so like a quarter of them. So remember also that voucher schools are not required to admit every student who applies, whereas public schools have to admit every student. All right, so these currently are the 2 voucher scholarships that are available to students in Florida. But this could all change depending on House Bill 1, what's happening with the changes, which we'll talk about in a minute. All right, so here's the difference between the 2 types of scholarships. The Family Empowerment Scholarship was meant for students with special needs and disabilities. So in order to qualify, you have to have one of those special needs or disabilities. It's funded from general school revenue. And the parents receive an education savings account. It's kind of like a debit card that they get to pay for services and costs of education, which they can put towards tuition, they can put it towards tutoring, they can put it towards materials that they need to purchase for the student as well. The Florida Tax Credit Scholarship is based on income, which means in order to qualify, a student the family has to be below a certain level. And this is funded by Florida tax credits that are given to corporations. So I'll explain more in a minute, in another slide. And the money is given in a check to the parents, but they must sign that check over to the private school. So you can see that the 2 differences. Okay, so what is an ESA? An education savings account is money that is given to the parent for private school tuition, supplies, tutoring, etc. And that is from the Family Empowerment Scholarship for students with special needs. The Florida Tax Credit Scholarship are corporate tax rebates that fund these scholarships. So the corporations get a tax break, and then they in turn turn around and donate the amount of that tax break to the state. And it is put in this scholarship funding organizations account, which is a nonprofit that manages this money and distributes the scholarships. So here's the process. An eligible parent applies to the scholarship funding organization. That's the management company that the state has hired to manage this money for the vouchers. The parents then, if they're accepted, and enroll their child in the private school, then the management company distributes the tuition to the parents, and the parents sign the check over to the school. That's for the first one, the family empowerment. The other one, the tax credit one, the corporations receive a tax credit against taxes owed to the state of Florida. And there's a variety of ways that those taxes, where they come from. So like if you bought a car recently, and of course you must pay sales tax on that car, one of the papers that you have to sign, or that you may sign, that they show you to sign, is if you agree to allow a portion of the sales tax you're paying to be donated to the scholarship, voucher scholarship, which when we bought a car about 2 years ago, we signed that paper and the money went over to the scholarship fund. And the scholarship funding organization, who is managing the money for the state of Florida, they actually keep 3% of this money to use for administration of the funds. And for that 3%, they determine the eligibility of the family or the child. They take in the applications, they monitor all of the receivables and the disbursements and so forth. So there are basically 2 scholarship funding organizations in Florida, but as you can see from these statistics, it's really just one. And that's the step up for students because they are the oldest and the largest, and they manage 99.5% of the tax credit scholarships. And according to Florida law, the legislature has put a cap on the amount of tax credits that can be accepted from the corporations at $698 million, which means that nearly $700 million, which would have gone into the state's budget from these taxes, instead go to the scholarship fund. And out of that money, 3% is kept by the scholarship funding organization, which adds up to about $20 million a year. So the step up for students is a very large and rich company because it provides over 90% of Florida vouchers, and each voucher, they take a 3% fee. They're based in Jacksonville. They're the 9th largest nonprofit in the US with $1 billion+ in assets. They spend a lot of their money, I think, on marketing and public relations and lobbying. They used to be audited by state law every year, but of course they succeeded in lobbying and getting that changed to just every 3 years they're audited. So this is a private organization that is managing public money. That's something to think about. Okay, so current law, eligibility is determined for a scholarship either by family income or special needs. And currently the cap in the family income is around $111,000 per year per family. So if you make less than that, you could qualify for the Family Empowerment Scholarship. 188,000 students received this scholarship last school year, or the federal tax credit. So that's the number of vouchers that were given out last year. Maximum scholarship currently $8,200 per student for the tax credit scholarship and $10,000 plus for the family empowerment. So that's what they're getting from the state. Now, this is the bill that is currently being debated in the legislature, HB 1 SB 202, the voucher expansion bill. Under this expansion, virtually all students would be eligible for private school vouchers. There would be no eligibility requirement for disability or family income or any of that. So it would also offer scholarships to homeschool students and children in foster care or families with an annual income of less than $55,000 or less would get priority. Another thing it would do is that the scholarships would become ESAs, education savings accounts. So in other words, the money is going to be given to the parents in the form of some kind of debit card where they would be paying for tuition or paying for other educational costs for their child. Again, the thing that's concerning is that anybody would qualify, not just low-income students, which was the original purpose of private school vouchers when they first started, that they were for students with special needs or with lower income to give them a step up. That's why it was called Step Up. So what does this mean for the rest of the schools? Well, it means that we're left with depleted funds. There's not going to be enough money for public schools because first they're losing money with the allocation to charter schools. So they're also losing money because of those tax credits that are not going into the general fund and instead are being given out as vouchers or scholarships. So the Florida Policy Institute estimates that over 5 years, it's going to cost $4 billion. The legislature seems to disagree with these figures. They say it's only going to cost $200 million, but the Florida Policy Institute has proven that that's impossible, because if anybody qualifies, even if only 25% of the people who don't have a voucher now get it, it's going to be millions and millions and millions of dollars. And it's just going to keep growing. So what options are we left? They can either increase, taxes, or they're going to reallocate funds away from public schools. Now, this bill has not been passed yet, but it seems pretty sure that it's going to pass. However, there's amendments that are being proposed. There's a lot of discussion about maybe they should have some kind of requirements, some kind of oversight. Where if we're giving this money, how do we know that these students are getting education from? Because there's such a huge variation in private schools. I mean, it goes all the way from schools like Pinecrest and American Heritage, and then there are schools that are just started by anybody, and they only start with students who are getting these vouchers. I had a quote. I won't read it. Okay, so the question is, are we fulfilling the mandate from the Florida Constitution? According to Article 9 in the Florida Constitution, the state must make adequate provision by law for a uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and high-quality system of free public schools. So it has to be uniform and efficient. Well, if you have no accountability, if you have no oversight, if you have no transparency, how do you know if it's safe and secure and uniform and efficient and high quality? How do you know? So is it constitutional is the question that the league asked. Also, there's the question of separation of church and state in the federal constitution. So it's a conundrum. Okay, so whatever your feelings are, and however you lean towards things, because obviously there are wonderful private schools, there are wonderful charter schools, there are wonderful traditional district schools, there are wonderful teachers in all of those schools. So if you have an opinion, then discuss it with your legislator, write or call your legislator. If you have opinions about this new bill, which may pass in whatever form, you can write letters to the editor, op-eds, you can make presentations to clubs and civic groups, attend school board meetings, and learn about what's happening at your local school board, and show your support for public education. You can join school support groups. And now for a short quiz. What do you think is the #1 factor in your child's academic success? Is it parental involvement, student passion for learning, economic makeup of the classroom? Does anybody have you can unmute if you have an answer. The #1 factor in a child's academic success.
Quality of the teacher.
Bingo. Okay, according to the Hattiesburg American, which I grant you isn't the same as the New York Times, but the #1 factor in a kid's success is that teacher in the classroom, said Petal High Principal Rob Knight. What a huge responsibility our teachers have. Study after study shows teacher quality is the biggest contributor to academic achievement. From personal experience and just about everything I've read, the overwhelming factor in student achievement is the effectiveness and quality of the classroom teacher. They are the ones directly responsible for engaging the students in learning. And I think that we probably all know this, really. You probably all can think about someone who was just a really inspiring teacher for your child, and what a difference it made. So thank you for listening, and now for questions.